glad that you've joined us. And before anything else, I want to acknowledge that with the strength of the truth and the force of the people, and I can even say this without crying, a jury of his peers has pronounced the truth. Derek Chauvin is guilty of the murder of George Floyd. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and recommit to the possibility of righteousness and justice in our country. So, this is the second week in our 5-part series, Perspectives from Havana. My name is Miriam Ansara. I'm a member of Massachusetts Peace Action, the Latin American Solidarity Coalition of Western Massachusetts, and a board member of the Center for Cuban Studies, the main sponsors for this evening, along with 16, actually 17 now, additional sponsoring organizations across the United States and Canada. I am speaking to you from Havana, where I spend part of the year. As we have in the United States, Cuba has just entered the second year of COVID-19. Unlike us, it is also the 62nd year of the US embargo, threats to its existence that we can only imagine. The Biden administration so far has shown no more humanity towards Cuba than the previous administration and does nothing to lift the boot off Cuba's neck. So we wanted people in the United States to hear directly from leading voices in Cuba about how the Cuban people and government are meeting these extraordinary challenges, this double boot of COVID-19 and the US embargo. And that reference is on purpose. Evidently, from the presence of so many of you tonight, you are interested, and we hope that you listen, ask questions. We've left plenty of time for that, and then take the actions we suggest at the end of the program. Tonight's discussion is on healthcare and science in Cuba, how Cuba is meeting the double challenge in this regard posed by COVID-19 and the embargo. It is led by Luis Alberto Montero Cabrera, professor of chemistry and senior researcher at the University of Havana, member of the Cuban Academy of Sciences and president of the scientific advisory councils, both of the University of Havana and the University of Information Sciences, among other positions. He has appeared in several international programs explaining Cuba's scientific approach and research in treatments and vaccines for SARS-CoV-2, and written extensively for Cubadebate and elsewhere on Cuba's successful vaccine. Needless to say, he also is well-versed in Cuba's public health system because, of course, he's not only an observer, but a participant. Taking turns moderating the discussion will be primarily Gloria Caballero, originally from Cuba and representing the Latin American Solidarity Coalition of Western Massachusetts, Sandra Levinson, Executive Director of the Center for Cuban Studies, Cole Harrison, Executive Director of Massachusetts Peace Action, and myself. Please pose your questions in the chat. Our moderators will either pose them to our speaker or, if they think time permits, call on you directly. If you're called upon to speak, we ask that you limit yourself to 1.5 minutes. After all, the goal is to have a discussion with as many people as possible, and above all with Luis. So Luis, let me start off by asking you, how does scientific research work in Cuba? How does the health system work? How has the pandemic unfolded here in Cuba?
Well, it's really hard to answer all 3 questions in a few minutes. But what I can do is that Cuba has a relatively extraordinary level of science in Latin America. Thanks to a policy of bringing up scientists since the practically very early times of the Cuban Revolution in the 60s. I remember I was a student when began the construction of the National Center for Scientific Research. All of us were astonished about that magnificent construction. And it was a sign of the true will of the Cuban government of the Cuban Revolution to go ahead with science. And we were, in a certain way, students at that time. We were involved, all of us, in that ambition to have a science in Cuba that was clearly not important or not popular before the revolution. And the generation of scientists was truly a national policy of the Cuban Revolution. And that generation of science was based in very good grounds, not exempt of problems and difficulties, mostly because the supplies of goods were always so limited by the U.S. embargo. And but all of us, we found a way to use international cooperation. And in the point where we are today, 60 years after, or perhaps 55 years after, is that we are having a relatively important scientific statement or system, and but still small because Cuba is a small country and extremely dependent on the foreign cooperation. Even that, the more important part of that scientific system is our human power, our scientific human potential, and this has been increased. Even in the case that we are losing a lot of them every year, we are losing practically most of our best students because the economic conditions here are, worsening because the embargo and many other problems we have. And we are maintaining a decent level of science, mostly in the field of biosciences. The field of biosciences, fortunately, the level was very good. It was perhaps the most prioritized system for supplies and human power in the Cuban human sciences, the Cuban scientific system. And from that point of view, it developed the corporation of bioscience and biomedicine that was able to answer the new challenge of the COVID pandemic. And in fact, most of the people involved there were previously working with us in the university. In fact, for example, the leader of the Finland Institute of Vaccines was my colleague there in the Department of Chemistry. And the first vaccine he developed was a very interesting and original vaccine for Haemophilus influenzae that was the first, and is still perhaps, the first synthetic vaccine in the world, the first synthetic vaccine commercialized in the world, and saved a lot of lives of child of this kind of disease of the very early times of the human lives. That means that we had the platforms, we have the knowledge on how to prepare vaccines. Also, we had a good system for public health. Our public health system is reaching practically the whole population. We are having one doctor, for example, and one doctor and a small office for them, each 100 or 150 families. That means we have whom to call in the case of any kind of problem. And of course, that system of family doctors allows the public health system to know where are the more vulnerable part of the population, and it allows people to, it allows the public health system to monitor practically where the big issues could occur. That's the reason, because when the pandemic began, our first case was in March 11, 2020. Immediately, the whole system started to work. In fact, since the end of January, when the pandemics began in China and other countries, mostly in Europe at that time, was established a plan for facing the pandemics. And that plan was starting to work just in March when the pandemics arrived. And in fact, it was a clear implementation of different actions, from isolation of ill people to monitoring and looking for cases house by house. The first times were times of closure. In fact, the country was closed. I was even not able to return to Cuba. I was abroad, and I was unable to go to Cuba during that time because the airports were closed. And the country maintained a reasonable, very low rate of disease. And of course, that situation cannot be maintained forever. And the airports were opened in November. And since then, a new wave arrived. And we are having much more cases now, but with the advantage that the system learned how to treat the disease. That means the relationship between the number of cases and dead people in the early times was higher than the relation between the number of cases and dead people in the later times, because the physicians, the protocol for treating ill people have been improved dramatically. Our figures are, of course, always a figure of now. Today we are having 538 dead people in the whole pandemic's time, and of course is regrettable. But our rate of lethality is only 0.56%. That means we are having a very low rate. You can see, for example, Norway has 0.65, but you can see that, for example, Florida is having 1.58. I mean, they are having 3 times more dead people with respect to the ill people than we have. That means, and you can imagine that the amount of resources are infinitely higher in other countries than ours. Our country is truly very modest in this way. We need for sustaining several activities, we need to do a big effort, even at the expenses of the scarcity of food and the scarcity of many other important goods. But what is more important is to save lives, and we try to save lives mostly. And I think that, in fact, how many people, you could imagine Mexico City is having now a lethality rate of 13.85%. I mean, of each 100 ill people, there are 13, near to 14 people are dying. And no, you will never know. For example, in our case, I can be sure that our figures are strictly the truth, because practically every case is followed, and the contacts are followed, and who were related is followed, and practically our figures are very, very confident. But in systems where you are having a very open and very liberal public health administration, you never know how many people truly is dying, how many people is truly ill. I mean, that's our point. In fact, the different variants of the virus are here, mostly among the strange variant, the new mutants. The most frequently found have been the South African one. But having a variant of the virus is not an event to be too much to be extraordinary. Viruses are simple molecules, well, relatively complex molecules, but they are more simple than a living being. Living beings are much more complex, and viruses are mutating surely because the way they are having to be reproduced in other beings. I mean, the normal way of viruses to subsist is mutating, like many other living systems. And for example, it has been reported that 5 other mutations also occurred here, not as important or not as well characterized as the South African or the British or the California or the Brazil mutations, but they are here. They are here. And the point is, the important point related to that is that just when you're creating a vaccine, you must, you expect that that mutations could be also affected by the vaccine. That means the immune system you develop when you are vaccinated could also fight the new mutants. That's, but you never know. Neither any other vaccine. We are now, thanks to that previously established platforms we had for vaccines, there are 5 different options for vaccines. 3 of them are based on all of them are based in the so-called RMBC or something like that. It's one of the characteristic proteins of the external part of the virus. And all of them, the 5 ones, are based on that. But some of the vaccines obtain that protein from one kind of fermentation, the other one another kind of fermentation. One of the fermentation is from a yeast, and the other one is from mammal cells. And the so-called soberanas are from mammal cells. They are tested here in Havana, and they are not only the protein, they are treated formerly chemical treated. My university entered that action, and in order to increase the capacity to rise the immune answer in the bodies, and they are working rather well. In fact, they cannot be causing any kind of disease, because what they are doing is to include in our blood an antigen that is not the virus, and it's only a small part of the virus, but sufficient to rise the immune answer, the immune response to fight the virus in the full virus. I mean, the way to work in this is more or less the same for all of them. There is one of the vaccines, the so-called Mambisa, is very interesting because could be used for further treatments. It is used by nasal applications. I mean, you can mostly in countries where you cannot display, or you cannot use because the poor people cannot have this kind of infrastructure. In a very primitive place, you can administer the vaccine by the nasal way, and it could work. That vaccine is not too much advanced nowadays, but could perhaps have a very good impact at the end of this year or next year. But what is very clear that Havana population will be vaccinated probably before summer, and the whole Havana vaccination, or at least the majority of the Havana vaccination, and the government says that the whole Cuban population could be vaccinated by the end of the summer. I mean, it's okay, and it's working that way. And it is thanks to the whole system, the scientific system in one hand, and the public health system in the other one. Nothing can work isolated. If you have scientists, but you have not the public health system, you can do nothing. If you have the public health system and no scientists, you can do nothing. If you have vaccines, that means it is a system that works together, and it is a very good point. I can give you more details, but I don't. Perhaps something could be more interesting if you ask me some questions.
Terrific. Gloria, would you take it away and start on the questions?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay.
Wonderful.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in this second series, and we really appreciate Dr. Luis Alberto Montero for his time and for sharing all this information. As you were speaking, there were people who were, who initially had their own questions, but then you, unbeknownst to them, suddenly started answering those questions. So thank you so much. That was the case of Cynthia Carlos. There are several questions though, and this is from Ilda Bolton. She wants to know about the syringe campaign, and if you could just explain what that campaign is about in a few words. And then I continue with the second question.
But sorry, I didn't get it. What kind of campaign?
La campaña para las, se me fue la palabra, con lo que inyectamos.
Jeringas.
Las jeringuillas, gracias.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
sorry. You know, there are several words
Pablo.
that are not useful in my profession, and you know, I'm a chemist, and so that's not a word that's familiar for me. Well, in fact, I am not familiar with that. It's very clear that any kind of device not produced by Cuba, or even some parts for devices produced in Cuba, are extremely important for us. You could imagine now syringes are needed for a single use. And if you are trying to vaccinate 11 million people, you will need 22 million of syringes because you are giving 2 doses. That's the case. Clearly, what is very clear as far as I know, we are not producing that. We must import it. But we must import also kits for PCR tests. We must import the most equipment for that. We are starting to produce some of them, but most of the parts there must be imported because we are not having an electronic industry capable to supply everything. Even neither China has that. I mean, we have an open economy, and we are forced to exchange with abroad. That's the point where the embargo or the blockade is truly damaging us. You could imagine having no tourists for the flow of money, having a reinforced blockade, making hard to find even energy. Even transportation of oil to Cuba is becoming harder. Any kind of support for providing syringes or providing any kind of thing for our public health system, we will welcome clearly. And I think the Cuban embassies elsewhere are available for that, for facilitating that thing.
So I get a message here that saying that the campaign is US and Canada based, plus in other countries. So it is one of the actions we are going to request from people, and people take tonight. So thank you so much. You were talking about resources, and Tobias Tetamanti wanted to know, well, how come Cuba, such a small country, few resources, how do you think Cuba managed to produce her own vaccines?
Well, I referred a little about that in my introduction. Vaccines are the key point of the Cuban public health. We prefer people not to be ill. We prefer people not to be treated in hospitals. That means vaccines are the key point because the Cuban public health system is not commercial. I mean, we are not getting more profits if people are going to hospitals. We are getting more profits if people are not going to hospitals. And vaccines are an ideal point. Cuba has, by the way, a very nice tradition in vaccines since the late 18th century. One of the pioneering countries in the world introducing the first vaccines against the smallpox was Cuba. And it was incredibly produced here at that time because the vaccine was essentially created in France, and it came to Spain. And because Cuba was the colony of Spain at that time, it was delayed to arrive here. And a Cuban physician started to produce vaccine here from the papers published about that. And he even, he was a hero in that direction. He was a physician, a scientist physician, Tomás Romay. But after the revolution, that work was essential if we wanted to have a universal public health system and as efficient as possible for universal public health system. And most of the vaccines received by children here are produced in the country still. And after the appearance of the biotechnological sector, that kind of vaccines became more sophisticated, more up to date. And for example, I can mention that the one I mentioned already, that was published in Science, was a hit in Science. You could imagine you do not need to go to a disease of the virus to create the vaccine with the risk to have to inject that virus in a child, but you go to the lab and you produce there the antigen, and it works. And it worked. I remember I was in my department during the time it was created, and it created a tradition in that direction. There are vaccines against cancer, trying to reinforce the immune system to work against that strange proper cells that are cancer. There are vaccines against hepatitis. One of the pioneering vaccines was against hepatitis B, and we cannot forget the famous vaccines against meningococcic disease that caused a lot of death in this country, and was created with a very advanced technology in the late 80s. Late 80s last century. That means we are having a tradition. We know how to prepare vaccines. And when the COVID appeared, the thing was where to find things, how to produce the antigen, and how to create the vaccines able to be effective in that direction. Vaccines are not only composed of antigens. Antigens are the molecules or the part of the virus that could explode the immune system in humans. They need to also to be helped for doing that. For adjuvants, the science of adjuvants is another point. It's very interesting. For example, the adjuvant of the more successful up to now the Cuban vaccine, the Soberana 002, is the tetanic toxoid. You are getting vaccinated against the tetanus and also the coronavirus. Now, incredibly, tetanus is a secondary problem. So the coronavirus is the one. But it serves for enhancing, for helping the vaccine to work. And it's very good in that direction. It's very good. I mean, it's a matter of tradition, it's a matter of know-how, and Cuba had the know-how. And of course, the matter was to create different options. And it was also nice that not a single lab was producing that. There were at least 2 labs working, and most of these labs were the external phase, because they are supported by other labs, other institutes that are producing the antigens, are producing different parts, are producing the vaccine itself. It means the system is working as a system. That's a good thing.
Thank you so much. And we have to remember that Cuba has a preventive, culture. So we prevent.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I would like to acknowledge Sandra Levinson. She's raising her hand. Go ahead, Sandra. Thank you for being here.
Unmute, Sandra. Unmute.
Open your microphone, Sandra.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This is my question. I want to know how, after having the vaccine accepted, and you have 1 or 2 or 3 vaccines, and you have suggested that by the end of the summer, the population in Cuba will be vaccinated. I want you to explain to people what the system is, how you would go about vaccinating so many people so quickly, because a lot of people, I'm sure, do not understand how the Cuban system works. And I think it would be great if you could explain exactly how the vaccine will be administered nationwide, if you know.
Well, I have some knowledge. I'm not directly involved in that, but I have some knowledge about how it works. We are having here an authority for regulation of vaccines, or any kind of medical treatment or medical or drugs or things like that. We have an agency, an independent agency that is in charge to authorize or not the use of the vaccine in the different phases of their testing. And let me tell you that it was the way used by all already used vaccines in the world. I mean, Pfizer vaccine, AstraZeneca vaccine, Moderna vaccine, all vaccines are following the rules of a regulatory agency. And sometimes the regulatory agency even authorize vaccines to be used in a kind of emergency use. Normally, a vaccine takes 5 or 10 years to be authorized by a regulatory agency, like ours. Our regulatory agency takes several years to authorize a vaccine, but it can, as the CDC in USA and many other agencies in the world, it can authorize urgent or extraordinary authorizations when you're sure that the vaccine is safe, is not producing secondary effects, and that the vaccine could rise the antibody level, the specific antibody levels in the human beings in a significant way. And
Yes, let's assume that it's acceptable and good, but how will you administer it nationwide?
Well, nationwide by public health, by the public health system, we are having small public health units elsewhere, and we are having even the so-called consultorios of the médico de la familia, the family doctors' places where they work, and they have minimal capacities there for administering the vaccines. Nowadays, for example, it is planned near to massive. If it is authorized, I expect they will authorize near to massive administration of vaccines during the spring in Havana to stop the outbreak in Havana. And nowadays, today was announced that all the polyclinicals, I don't know, all the public health units here are now ready to administer the vaccine to population. That means that we are having in every town, every small quartier, we are having a public health unit able to administer the vaccine. They are not CVS, they are not Walgreens, but they are administered by physicians and nurses that are doing that, that are able to do that. It is a minor problem here. The minor problem here is where to administer the vaccine, because we have the units for doing that. There are many other problems related, for example, to infrastructure of carrying the vaccines or producing them, or the flasks or the syringes, as a question previously, that could be a bottleneck in that point. But the places where the vaccines are administered are clearly previously established. We don't need to use it in an extraordinary way, to prepare extraordinary places for that.
So I'm going to interject because I think it's something that in Cuba people take for granted.
Yes.
I happen to know this firsthand because last year I volunteered for the family doctor in my neighborhoods. And the way it works is for every about 350 families, there's a family doctor's office who's in charge of those families. So that's around 1,064 people, maybe 1,100 total. Then for every 10 to 16 of those family doctor's offices, there is a community health center. And that community health center can do just about everything. And if they can't, they will refer you to a hospital, but it's a comprehensive community health center. So then those community health centers all belong to a hospital system. So I will tell you that this is the country that once vaccinated in 1978, or maybe it was 1979, every single child between the age of 0 and 4 in 45 minutes. And that was before they had the family doctor system and the poly. So I know from my local family doctor that there is a staged rollout that's planned. And I was just talking to somebody who today who said, well, I can't go in the clinical trials, which just about everybody I know seems to be in. It's something like 150,000 people. How I know everybody, I don't know. But this person who's 84, Hugo, said, well, I can't be in the trials. I'm in the first batch of people to get vaccinated because then they're going to do the people over 80. So it'll be a staged rollout similar to the one we're used to in the United States. But it will be thoroughly organized by systems that are already in place. They have vaccinated everybody for everything you can imagine. Right, Louise? Do I have it right?
Yes.
Thank you for the assistance. Mary.
So many interesting questions for you.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah. So people would like to know about, how does Cuba share its intellectual property? They want to know about Cuban patent, of the vaccines, and if you could talk about it. And if you know about phase 3 has been completed and controlled placebo test, if that is completed. So we're talking about Cuban patent, the vaccines, if they share the formula and the intellectual property, how is that done? And if Cuba has gone through phase 3 of the tests.
Well, as far as I know, the Abdala and Soberana 02 are in phase 3. What means phase 3? Phase 3 is the more extensive test before the vaccine could be declared as a safe and useful vaccine. Phase 3 requires thousands of people. Even there were a problem in the early times when the vaccines began to be developed because we had no sufficient cases for a phase 3. That's one of the reasons because Cuba established a contract with Iran, for example, to perform certain phase 3 trials there in Iran because they had much more cases than us. And of course, it could be very good to get results of that. What means phase 3? Phase 3 is an extended trial, including placebo. I mean, you are people in the true phase 3 trial. There are, for example, 44,000 people involved. Some of them, with a double-blind test, will be injected by placebo. In order to, and that placebo is because the double-blind, nobody knows who was injected with placebo and who was not. And of course, all of them were tested by the specific antibody creation. And of course, they must be related. Also, many other symptoms of side effects are tested in a near to massive testing. In our case, also is planned, and in fact, this is in effect, another branch of the phase 3 trial, the so-called intervention trial. It means that for both Abdala in the eastern part of the country and Soberana in the western part of the country, there are around 150,000 people also vaccinated without placebo. Also it's part of the phase 3. It's also for testing the behavior of the vaccines against a population being infected. It's not only testing how much the antibody and the response of the body is working, that like the other 44,000 or 49,000. Is how much the true population is answering in an environment of infected people. I mean, that are the current phase 3 trials now carried out here in Cuba. There is a phase 2 trial of Soberana Plus. Soberana Plus is designed for treating people who already had the disease. You know, one of the purpose of this point is to eliminate the disease. And if you want to eliminate the disease, you must eliminate the possibility of people to be infected. And it is not clear how much lasts the immunity in people who already got the disease. In fact, there are cases reported of people who have been infected twice. And in fact, the way we are treating to enlarge or to prolong the capacity of the body to repel the infection is to also vaccinate people who had already the virus in order to enforce that. And there is one of the 5 vaccines is Soberana Plus, and it will be dedicated for that. It's a very interesting, from the chemical point of view, it was very interesting vaccine because they got the antigen and they doubled it. They dimerized that. by chemical way in order to increase the capacity to be recognized by the immune system of the human. It's a very interesting from the scientific point of view vaccine.
Would you like to touch on the patent, how Cuba would share
Patents.
property? Yes.
I'm not familiar with that, but I suppose all of them are patent, even in USA.
And how widely is the use of, the nasal spray vaccine?
The what?
The nasal spray, the spray.
The nasal one, yes. The nasal one, I have no news about that. I know that it have been working, and in principle, there are other nasal vaccines. Most of the flu vaccines commonly used in the world are applied by nasal way. And apparently the scientists who designed the vaccines, they got the antigen, the same antigen, and they made a preparation. In fact, there were a previous attempt of a nasal vaccine here in Cuba for all disease, and now they are trying to use that. I don't know. I'm not familiar how advanced is that the research, but I think that it has a perspective. A scientist I know was very, very enthusiastic about the possibility of that vaccine because in the first attempts, it truly rose immune response. I mean, it truly was effective, but of course, it requires. I suppose that that priorities must be made in that case, and because you need to urgently to vaccinate the whole population, and the only way to do that is focusing in a particular effective way. And the two more effective possibilities now are Soberana 02 and Abdala.
There's one question here from Dick Cluster, and he wants to know about the intervention study. He's heard different numbers about how big it will be and when. If you could talk about it, please.
The number is 150,000 people, both in the eastern part and in the western part of the country. In the eastern part by Abdala and the western part by Soberana. And the people who have been vaccinated have been people related to the public health. My daughter, for example, she's working in a lab for PCRs. She's managing that lab of PCR, and she was vaccinated. And people taking care of people in public health system are vaccinated. There are much more than 70,000 people in that involvement. And I suppose that they have been administered to other vulnerable portion of the population. I'm not familiar with the exact distribution of how have been distributed. But clearly, it was needed, that 150,000 tests for truly going ahead with a more massive application. In any case, it requires 2 doses. And the intervention testing began in the middle of last month, the previous month. That means that it requires to have answers, to have true information about how effective have been resulting. We will need to have to wait until the middle of May for having some that. I suppose that I have no information about that.
Yes. There's also in the chat, there's a curiosity between, what's the difference between the Cuban vaccines and the US vaccines?
Well, they're not a single US vaccine. There are several kinds of US vaccines. There are 2 vaccines based on RNA. Most important, they are Pfizer and Moderna. That's a very new design of vaccines. Where you introduce the code for the body to create itself the antigen, and then to fight it. It's a very recent achievement of science, and apparently it's resulted very effective. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is using the so-called adenoviruses. Adenoviruses are other viruses that non-lethal in principle, but are able to produce themselves the antigen, and the antigen then is fight by the immune system. and it is very similar to I think that AstraZeneca is working. No, sorry, I'm confused. The adenovirus is used by Sputnik V. The adenovirus is used by Sputnik V. I don't know exactly AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson on the same basis. I don't know if they are using also adenoviruses. Sorry, I am not a specialist. I am doing my best here to explain you, but I am not the person exactly specialist in that. And that they are technologies, and some of them more modern, some of them more ancient. For example, most of the Chinese vaccines are based in the very old style of the inactivated viruses. It is more comprehensive. In fact, you are administrating the whole menu of antigens to the body, and you teach the body to fight all the. But it has a kind of risk in a certain way because you are inactivating the virus, but you are injecting the virus in a certain way, and that means that it's safe, clearly safe. But people are discussing which of them are the best. And I think that the future will say what will be the most effective and appropriate way to administer antigens to the body for getting a good result. Ours is absolutely safe because we are administering only the antigen. We are not administering nothing but a simple protein that serves for nothing than create antibodies.
Yeah. Can you please touch upon the, the extensive use of interferon and the production of nasalferon as a preventative, please?
Well, all interferons are good helpers for fighting viral infections. In fact, they have been discovered for fighting certain features of the cancer development. And the Cuban biotechnological system had a very, very extensive experience. In fact, it was originated mostly in interferon, and they had a menu of different ways to administer interferon for different purposes. Rather successful, and for example, here have been tested that and demonstrated that the people being administered by nasal way of interferon or that certain kind of interferon are better protected against the infection. You know why the nasal way? We are having a very sensitive membranes in the nasal conducts that are able to allow to be penetrated by molecules, external molecules. And that's the reason because the nasal way is both a sensitive point for entering viruses and also a sensitive point for entering antigens for fighting viruses. And that's the way because when you reinforce the immune system in the nasal ways, you are helping the body to avoid the entering of the virus. And apparently, nasalferon have been very successful here for preventing the disease in elder people, mostly in elder people.
In elder people. So Michael X asks, how is Cuba faring tourism and COVID, and is food production being impacted? We want to go to
I don't know.
passport vaccination.
I don't know. I could imagine how, but I don't know exactly. Of course, the international press have been speculating as if Cuba will administer vaccines as part of the tourist package and things like that. I think that tourism is a way of marketing. It's a way of creating value, and as many other things in the market, you are free to use several ways to do things. I cannot answer that question from any particular information, but what I could say is that hopefully how many things could be better than the vaccine to be administered to tourists in the case of if you're selling something? And of course, being clear that the vaccines for Cubans will be completely free, for free. Cubans, we will pay nothing for that. We are clearly, we are absolutely convinced of that, sometimes too much convinced that we are not normally thinking on how much it costs. It's absolutely fair if you use the profits of touristic industry to support vaccine production and also to support the vaccination of Cubans. It's a very absolutely ethical and fair trade.
We'd like to thank everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Luis. We have now the second phase of our presentation, and I will yield the floor to Mary, and we're going to talk about some actions that we could take to support, Cuba and its effort to, just combat the COVID, and let's move on. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much. Thanks.
By the way, someone is asking me, I am in Cuba now.
Yeah, so Luis is in Cuba.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. It's just, I'm sitting here thinking, I wish that we had programmed an hour and a half because there's so many questions. However, we are whetting your appetite, and we hope that what you will do is actually take action now. We need to lift the boot off Cuba's neck. And we need to do it for two reasons. And one of them has to do with Cuba and the other has to do with us. Not only do we need to continue to search for justice and do what's right, but we could use Cuba's treatments to lower our mortality rates here. We could, I know, most people in this room would like to be able to travel to Cuba. And I have to tell you, I'd like to see you here. We would like Cuba to be recognized for the work they do in science and medicine, the brigades they have sent all over the world. And to do that, we need to get our administration and our Congress to take action. If Cole will put up on the screen the actions that we are asking people to take, then even a few minutes past 7, we're going to give people time to write this down. Also, you can see in the chat that there are petitions. Now, Cole did not put the Move On, the Latin American Working Group petition, so we're going to make sure we send that to you. He put on the Move On petition.
I'm sorry, I forgot one of them. Okay.
But the Latin American Working Group also has an important petition that we would like you to sign. And now IFCO Pastors for Peace has also put one in. But don't worry, this is not the end of our conversation. We have other weeks, but also we will send you a follow-up. The people raised the question about syringes. Cuba is going to need, I think it's 30 million syringes to vaccinate all of its population. Bob Schwartz, who's on this call, could weigh in with that. We
jump
are
in here, Mary. I'd be happy to.
Is that
It's Bob.
Bob?
Yeah.
Talk about the Syringes for Cuba campaign, would you?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Then I'm also going to make sure that you know that if you can go to that very first one called a petition, actually, given the power of mass peace action, when you put in your zip code, your own senators and your congressperson will come up, and you can write a letter directly to them and to President Biden and to that man in the State Department and say, do your job. Allow remittances, allow the free flow of travel and commerce, get Cuba off the list of terrorist countries, and restore full consular services and resume negotiations. Bob, take it away.
I'll be real quick, Mary. The Saving Lives campaign, which is a broad-based coalition of local and national groups throughout the United States who are opposed to the embargo, have launched a campaign to send syringes to Cuba. And to be honest with you, I think it's the most important work that I have ever done. I've been working in Cuba 27 years now. We've shipped $190 million worth of medicines, medical supplies. This is probably the single most important effort that the Solidarity Movement can do right now. Luis, to your point, Cuba is going to need probably 30 million syringes because the dosing is 3 doses. It's not 2 doses. And they've got a very ambitious program. They hope to vaccinate Havana, as Luis said, by the end of the summer. They hope to vaccinate the entire country by the end of the year. That's a tough chore for anybody to do, and they're not able to get their hands on syringes. They have very little hard currency. The price of syringes has gone up dramatically. It's gone up by a factor of 10 over the last several months. Everybody is looking for the same syringes. So Mary has posted a link. We're taking pledges right now. We hope to raise $100,000 this month to be able to start sending syringes to Cuba. And we're talking about an initial buy, 3 million. We hope to send 5 million syringes to Cuba. And
wonderful.
That's the campaign. It's a big effort. It's important. And as Mary said, you know, we're not going to be safe here in the United States until everybody's safe. And the truth is, people are not going to travel to Cuba in large numbers until Cuba's a safe place to travel. So there's a lot of reasons for doing it. But Cuba has helped the entire world over the past year during the pandemic. They've sent dozens of brigades out. You'll remember them in Italy, in Spain, in Mexico. It's the least we could do to repay them for everything that they have done over the years to help globally. And I'll stop there, Mary, because I can go on and on about the syringe campaign.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Bob.
There's one more thing that somebody posted in the chat, which is that all over the United States, all over Canada, all over Europe, and I think in several countries in Africa and elsewhere, started by a Cuban American named Carlos Lasso, there are caravans of cars that go out and sound their horns and have signs to end the embargo. And guess what? The last one also was here in Havana, and I found out about it too late, but I am going to be there in my nephew's 1974 Fiat, which we almost have to pull with our feet. We will be there, and we urge all of you to find the caravan nearest you. There's one, last time there was one in Holyoke. We hope there'll be one in Boston. They're all over Florida, Canada. If you can, if you on this chat can post where you're going to have one, if there's going to be one in your city, that would be very helpful to people. And then also we can send those out to people. Oh, also Ike is reminding us that there is tomorrow a webinar on the anniversary of the Bay of Pigs and the start of the literacy campaign. So there's plenty of actions to take. And also, we'll leave this up for a few more minutes, but do come back next week. Next week, Marta Nunez will be talking about sociology and feminism in Cuba. The week after that, Nancy Mortajón will be talking about poetry and literature. These are some of the outstanding women in Cuba whose voices are heard all over the world and will be heard right here in these rooms. And then our last presentation will be from the next generation. It'll be from David Falla, who's a jazz musician, and his partner, Isabel Rodriguez, who's both an archaeologist and a photographer. And we ask you to invite all of your friends. We will be sending you the notice. You can forward it. And now we ask you to please write down everything that you can do and take action. Look at this. You can be in Miami, you can be San Francisco and Oakland, but they don't tell us where. But we'll find that out and we'll let you know. We were going to have music to play, but we don't. So we'll just Give you a few minutes. We'll be quiet. We'll think about justice being done today in the courtrooms in Minneapolis and about all the justice there is to be done. And thank you.
Hooray! They got him.